The wind in the hangar carried the smell of burned metal and cold rain from the open blast doors, mingling with the copper temps of blood drying on his knuckles. Rourke's breathing came slow and heavy, each inhale pulling the weight of the choice deeper into his ribs. The station's alarms pulsed in the distance, low and steady, like a heartbeat counting down to the end. He kept his eyes fixed on the narrow corridor ahead, the one the enemy would come through first. The polished floor still bore the scuffs from where the alien mother had stumbled, her arms wrapped tight around the child as he'd guided them away. Now they were gone, tucked into the escape module that was slipping quietly into the shadows between moons. He didn't watch it leave. He didn't have the time. His rifle felt heavier than usual, not because of its weight, but because of the knowledge that there would be no reloading, no retreat, no cover worth the name. He flexed his fingers over the trigger, blood drying in, thin flakes along the seams of his gloves. Outside, the sky was painted in deep war-colored streaks of red and black, where the enemy ships burned their way through atmosphere. He could hear the distant thrum of their troop carriers, a low vibration crawling up through the metal floor and into his boots. He'd told her without words that she had to run, that he would hold the line, that whatever happened here, she had to live, and the child had to see another sunrise somewhere far from this place. She hadn't argued. Her eyes had said everything: fear, gratitude, guilt, and then she was gone into the dark. The sound came first, sharp, mechanical howl, followed by the slow, steady march of boots that weren't shaped like any humans. The corridor lights flickered as shadows swelled at the far end, tall and angular, shifting in ways that made the mind recoil. Rourke adjusted his stance, planting himself between the enemy and the path they would never take as long as he stood. He thought of the child's tiny fingers clutching at his sleeve earlier, the soft hum the mother had made to calm them. He took one slow breath, tasting the cold air. The storm outside howled, and somewhere deep inside, he welcomed it. The first to emerge from the dark was not a soldier, but a machine along. Insect-legged thing, its carapace glistening with fluid that dripped onto the deck in sizzling drops. It moved like it was tasting the air, sensors sweeping, head cocking unnaturally. Rourke raised his rifle and squeezed the trigger. The burst cracked through the air, muzzle flash painting the corridor in golden shadow. The machine's head split open, sparks showering against the walls, and its body collapsed into twitching stillness. But behind it, more forms pressed forward, heavier, their armor grown rather than forged, their eyes to pits of steady, cold light. The corridor was built to funnel anything coming through into a narrow kill zone, and Rourke used every inch of it. Bullets tore into chitin and synthetic sinew, shredding the first rank before they could raise their weapons. The report of his rifle was deafening, each shot a heartbeat against the pounding in his ears. Spent casings clinked and spun across the floor, catching in the cracks where the deck plating had warped. He moved with precision born of desperation. Into cover, switching angles, making every round count. Then the smell hit sharp, chemical, and wrong. The second wave came differently. They didn't rush. They spread, their limbs scraping against the walls, their claws carving deep lines into metal as if claiming the ground. They were here for him, and they knew exactly who they were hunting. Felt it in the way they moved, slow, deliberate, as though they could already taste the victory. A sharp crack above made him glance up, vents shifting. One of them dropped. From the ceiling, landing so close, he could see the jagged lines running through its armored hide. He drove the rifle's muzzle under its chin and fired point blank, the blast shaking his shoulder. The body folded with a wet thud, its limbs twitching as black fluid pooled on the floor. The corridor felt smaller now, as every breath came faster. He could hear them speaking low, guttural tones that seemed to ripple inside the skull. He didn't understand the words, but the intent was obvious. They weren't just here to kill him. They were here to break him before they did. And somewhere beyond the walls, the escape module was still moving through cold space. That thought steadied him. If he had to be the wall they shattered themselves against, then so be it. The next volley hit him before he saw it coming. A shard of molten metal punched through his shoulder plate, spinning him against the wall. The pain was white-hot, sudden enough to knock the breath from his lungs. His left arm screamed with every movement, but the rifle stayed in his hands. Blood ran warm beneath the armor, soaking into the fabric, dripping down to the deck where it mingled with the alien fluid already pooling there. The sharp, coppery scent filled his helmet's filters. They came faster, no, more careful advance. Just a relentless flood of armored bodies. He fired until the rifle's chamber clicked. Dry, then drew the pistol from his thigh holster without missing a beat. The smaller weapon barked sharply, muzzle flares strobing the dark. The nearest enemy jerked back as the rounds tore into its chest, but another was already climbing over the corpse. One slammed into him, the impact driving him hard into the bulkhead. Its claws raked across his armor, screeching as they sought a seam. He smashed the butt of the pistol into its head once, twice, until bone and plating cracked, then kicked the body away. The corridor floor was slippery now, his boots finding less grip with each step. He knew they were trying to drive him back, to force him toward the inner choke point where numbers would crush him. But retreat wasn't an option. Every meter lost was a meter gained toward the mother and child's doom. He pushed forward instead, firing short, controlled bursts, feeling each shot jar through his wounded arm. A sudden flash lit the corridor plasma bolt, striking the wall just above his head. The heat seared across his neck, the smell of scorched material burning into his senses. He dropped low, rolling behind a collapsed support beam. His heart hammered, but his breathing steadied. Through the gaps in the wreckage, he saw them pause, not because they feared him, but because they were reassessing. They were learning him. Every shot, every movement, every pause. And when they struck again, it would be worse. He tightened his grip on the pistol, blood slicking the handle. Somewhere far above, the emergency lights flickered, then died. The corridor sank into shadows, broken only by the faint glimmer of alien eyes. The darkness didn't scare him, but it meant they were ready to close in. They hit him all at once, a rush of bodies crashing through the dark like a living wave. The first slammed into his injured side, driving the air from his lungs and bending him backward against the wall. Claws tore at his armor, fingers hooked into gaps, teeth snapping inches from his face. He jammed the pistol under its jaw and pulled the trigger. Alien convulsed and fell away, but two more were already filling the gap, their weight forcing him down to one knee. He used the momentum, twisting and letting himself fall so that the second attacker passed over him. The move wrenched his wounded shoulder, lightning pain surging up his arm, but it gave him the space to come up on his feet again. His boot lashed out, kicking the third back into the others. The pistol clicked empty, no time to reload. He pulled the combat knife from his belt. Close fighting was worse. You could smell them hot, metallic breath tinged with something sweet and rotting. Their skin was slick and cold under his grip, their muscles knotting like cables when they struck. He stabbed once, twice, twisting hard to free the blade. His other hand braced against the wall for balance, smearing it with his own blood. One managed to hook his leg and drag him down, the deck plating slamming into his chest. The alien's full weight pinned him. His claws scraped against his helmet visor, leaving deep grooves. He jammed the knife up through the seam in its chin and shoved until the handle was buried to the hilt. His body twitched, went slack, and he shoved it aside. He was breathing hard now, vision tunneling, his wounded arm growing weaker with every heartbeat. Somewhere behind him, deeper in the ship, he thought he heard a muffled cry high and thin. The child, still alive, still waiting. Attackers hesitated for the briefest moment, their formation rippling with uncertainty. They had expected him to break by now. They didn't understand that breaking was never part of the plan. He straightened, pulling a fresh magazine for the pistol with fingers that felt numb and slow. Blood dripped steadily onto the deck. He slid the mag home, racked the slide, and stepped forward into the shadow where their eyes glimmered. If this was where they wanted to finish it, then he would make them earn every step over his body. The hallway narrowed ahead, metal ribs arching low overhead. The flickering light from damaged panels painting everything in stuttering shadows. He had chosen this place earlier, before the first wave even hit choke point. Tight angles, nowhere for numbers to matter. Now it was the last strip of ground between the enemy and the hatch. Where the alien mother and her child were hidden, his boots scuffed over scattered shell casings and splinters of broken plating as he backed into position, pistol-out knife ready. In his offhand, the scent of ozone and burned flesh hung thick in the air, curling in his nostrils with each breath. His shoulder burned with every movement, the wounds soaking through the layers beneath his armor, but he kept the pistol steady. He could already hear them coming, their footfalls more like claws scraping stone than boots on metal. The first one burst into the corridor, too fast to think, its head snapping toward him. He put 2 rounds through its chest before it finished, turning the impact, throwing it back into the others. They tripped over the body, snarling, their limbs scraping the walls as they shoved forward in a mess of rage and hunger. He stepped back deliberately, firing until the slide locked empty, then let the pistol drop on its lanyard and brought the knife up. The next attacker lunged and he pivoted to meet it, slashing across its throat, the cut deep enough to spray hot blood against the wall. The smell was sharper than his own, acidic, almost electric on his tongue. Another came in low, aiming for his legs, and his boot came down hard on its head, the crunch echoing in the narrow space. He knew he couldn't keep this pace forever. For every one he dropped, more pressed forward, and fatigue was crawling up his arms like lead. Behind him, the sealed hatch was silent. He didn't dare look back. Even the thought of it felt dangerous, as though the enemy might sense the weakness. Every move had to say the same thing: "You will not pass while I stand." They began to pile in again, using the bodies of their fallen as cover. He felt one claw rake across his armor, tearing through to skin. The warmth spread fast under the plates, forced the pain aside, thrusting the knife upward into another throat, and the alien went limp in his arms. He shoved it aside and stepped forward into the gap. This wasn't about killing them all. It was about time, seconds, minutes, anything that let the 2 behind that hatch keep breathing. And as long as he could still stand, those seconds were his to give. The air was getting heavier, thick with smoke and the metallic temps of blood, both his and theirs. His vision swam for half a heartbeat as he steadied himself against the wall. But the clatter of claws on metal yanked him back into focus. They were learning. No more blind charges. They were pushing in with precision now, moving in low and high at once, using the fallen as shields. The first one of the new wave darted in under his guard, its jaws snapping for his wrist, driving his forearm into its mouth just far enough to keep it from clamping down on the knife hand. Pain flared white as its teeth bit through armor weave, but he forced his arm deeper, shoving the blade into the soft joint beneath its chin. The creature spasmed and went still. He yanked his arm free, shaking off the hot spill that followed. Another shape loomed, bigger than the rest, its plated hide glistening under the dim corridor lights. This one didn't hesitate. It slammed into him like a wall, the impact throwing him back into the bulkhead. Something in his ribs screamed as he hit, the breath knocked out of him. He stabbed upward without thinking, the blade scraping off its armor. He felt the weight shift as it raised a clawed hand for the killing blow. He ducked, grabbed a dropped rifle from the floor, and jammed the barrel under its chin before pulling the trigger. The shot was deafening in the close quarters, splintering bone and spraying the ceiling. The alien collapsed, its twitching limbs tangling with the next attacker trying to push past. He stepped over them, blocking the path again, but he could feel the shift. They were pressing harder now, sensing his slowing movements, smelling his blood. One slammed into him from the side, claws slicing into his thigh. His leg buckled, and he barely caught himself on the wall. He stabbed low, the blade sliding between armor plates, and the creature sagged against him before dropping. His breath came ragged now, his ears ringing from the close gunfire. Somewhere behind him, the hatch gave a faint metallic groan. He risked a glance, just a flicker, and saw it bow inward slightly under some distant pressure. They weren't just coming for him anymore. They were coming for the hatch. And for the first time, he realized they might actually get there before he could stop them. The sound was wrong, too sharp, too final to be anything but the end of the barrier. A grinding shriek ripped down the hall as the hatch's locking pins tore from their housing, the metal bowing inward before a violent snap sent shards flying. The mother's startled cry from within was muffled, but still cut through the haze. In his head, he didn't have time to feel relief that they were still alive. Now it was just distance, measured in heartbeats and steps. He forced himself into the gap, staggering forward as the first alien forced its snout through the breach. Its eyes locked on him, and it lunged before the hatch could swing wide enough for its bulk. He drove the butt of his rifle into its jaw, the crack of bone satisfying in a way he didn't have the luxury to dwell on. A second alien jammed a claw through beside the first, catching his shoulder in a burning rake of pain. His arm went numb, but he pushed in anyway, jamming the muzzle between the first creature's teeth and firing until it went limp. The hatch swung wider, the corridor behind him filling with their war shrieks. They poured through now, no longer cautious because they could smell the unprotected inside. He fell back, planting himself in the doorway, knowing it wasn't defense anymore but delay. Claws reached past him, brushing the air in the room, and the alien mother hissed in terror. A shape darted in low, a blur of motion, and he kicked out, feeling something snap under his boot. It screamed, but another was already clambering over its fallen kin, its talons curling for his throat. He shoved upward, catching it under the chin with the rifle's muzzle, and fired point blank. The flash blinded him for half a second enough for another to slam into his ribs. He fell backward into the safe room, dragging the alien with him and rolling so he could put the blade into its side. It convulsed, but the gap was open now, fully. Nothing between them and the mother and child, except him on one knee. The air was a mess of ozone, smoke, and blood, his own warm trickle running down his chest and arm. Pooling in the torn fabric at his hip, they hesitated for half a breath, as if even they could feel the gravity of this narrowing space, and he could see it in their twitching limbs. When they came, it would be all at once. He tightened his grip, shifted to cover more of the doorway with his body, and drew in what might be his last steady breath. They surged, and the room turned into a storm of claws, teeth, and smoke. He planted himself in front of the mother and child, his back pressed to their trembling forms, feeling every shudder of their fear through his spine. The first alien slammed into him, its weight driving the air from his lungs, and he fired upward into its throat before it could drive its teeth home. It collapsed half across him, heavy and hot with its own blood, but there was no time to push it aside before the next one came. He didn't try to block the blows anymore. There were too many. Instead, he let them hit where they would as long as they didn't reach past him. A claw raked down his side, burning like fire, but he shoved the attacker back with the butt of his weapon, buying just enough space to fire into its chest. The sound was deafening inside the small room, each shot ringing against the metal walls until his ears were full of static. One got past his guard, its arms snaking around him, talons stretching toward the child, grabbed it by the wrist, wrenching, until he felt bones snap, then drove his knee into its abdomen, forcing it back. Another came low, teeth flashing for his leg, and he stomped down hard, feeling the crunch vibrate up his boot. His strength was bleeding out with every heartbeat. Every wound but the mother's desperate grip on the back of his torn vest anchored him. She wasn't pulling him away. She was holding him there like she knew the second he fell, so would they. The child's thin cries cut through the battle noise, sharp and pure, and he forced himself to move faster, to hit harder, even as his arms grew heavier. The doorway became a mound of bodies, alien and human blood mingling on the floor, slick under his boots. Smoke from his rifle mingled with the copper temps in the air. Still they came, crawling over their dead, driven by hunger. Or rage, didn't matter which. He met them all, the last unbroken line between them and the two fragile lives behind him. Something tore across his thigh, nearly dropping him, but he caught himself on the doorframe and kept firing. Every shot felt like a stolen second, every swing of the blade like a defiance carved into the fabric of inevitability. He was running out of ammo, was running out of time, but they weren't past him yet. The mother's voice rose behind him, not words he could understand, but a low, steady chant, as if she were trying to will him to stand, to hold, to remain her shield. And for the moment he did. The last round, fired with a sharp, empty click, that echoed far louder in his ears than any explosion before it. The recoil was gone, the weapon suddenly just dead weight in his hands. He didn't even look at it, there was no time. He let it fall. The clatter against the floor swallowed instantly by the roar of the creatures forcing themselves through the doorway. One lunged, and he caught it by the throat with both hands, slamming it back so hard against the wall that he felt the vibration in his teeth. It clawed at his arms, its talons carving fresh heat into his skin, but he held until the gasping, wet sounds in its throat stopped. He barely had time to let it drop before another crashed into him, heavier, angrier. Teeth sank into his shoulder and pain detonated through his entire chest. He roared not in fear, but to keep his legs from buckling, then drove his head forward into its skull until it reeled back. Dazed. The floor was slick, and his boots kept sliding. Blood theirs made every step treacherous, every movement slower. His knife flashed in his hand now, the only thing between them and the alien mother's arms, clutching her child behind him. He drove the blade into the side of a lunging attacker, feeling it shudder and go limp. Another reached for his leg, dragging itself over the bodies, and he kicked its face hard enough to feel bone crack. His breaths came short and harsh. His vision narrowed at the edges, black creeping in, but he refused to go down. Each time a claw came close to passing him, he threw himself into its path. His body was no longer just his idea was a wall, a barricade of flesh and will. A scream tore from the child, sharp and terrified, and he moved without thinking. He stepped into the path of a massive figure that filled the doorway, its armor-like hide gleaming under the emergency lights. It swung, and the force of the blow sent him staggering, blood spraying from his lips. But he didn't fall. Not yet. The mother's chant had grown louder now, the rhythm like a heartbeat, the sound curling around him and holding him upright. The big creature lunged again, and he ducked under its arm, ramming the knife up into the softer underside of its jaw. It convulsed, shrieked, and collapsed in the threshold. Blocking others from pushing through if only for a few seconds, he knew those seconds were all that remained. No more weapons, no more strength. It's just him, his heartbeat, and the promise he'd made without speaking that they would not take them while he stood. He staggered, barely holding himself upright, each breath like dragging fire through shattered ribs. The barricade of bodies at the doorway shifted under the weight of more enemies forcing themselves forward, their claws scraping metal, their eyes lit with hunger. His legs trembled, threatening to drop him, but he forced them steady. He fell now. Everything he had done would vanish in a heartbeat. Behind him, the alien mother's chanting had reached a pitch that thrummed through the floor, a sound deeper than mere voice, vibrating in his bones. The child's glow was no longer dim, pulsed, spilling soft waves of silver light across the room. That light brushed his torn skin, and for a moment the pain dulled, replaced by a strange, distant calm. He didn't dare look back. Not because he feared the sight, because he knew that if he did, he let himself see the fragile hope in their faces. His knees would give, his will would break. So he kept his eyes forward, locked on the shadowed, clawed figures pressing closer. He saw them hesitate for the first time. A crack split the air not from a weapon, but from the walls themselves, as if reality had been struck. The silver light swelled, pushing outward in invisible waves, making the air shimmer. The creatures hissed and staggered back, some crumpling entirely, their bodies dissolving into drifting ash. The largest among them roared and fought the pull. But the light coiled around it, dragging it backward as if unseen hands were tearing it from the world. His knees finally buckled. He hit the floor hard, his blood pooling beneath him, the knife falling from his grip. His lungs strained to pull. In air, each breath wet and shallow. He turned his head finally and saw them. The mother knelt, the child cradled in her arms, both surrounded by a sphere of pure, blinding light. Their eyes met his. She whispered something not in his tongue, but he understood. The light consumed the room, swallowed the door, the monsters, the wreckage, everything. For a heartbeat, there was no sound, no weight, no pain, only a sense of release, of knowing he had done enough. When the light faded, the mother and child were gone. The room was empty except for him, lying still in the silence, his body unmoving. Outside, the corridor was strewn with ash. Somewhere far away, a star burned a little brighter. He had been the wall. He had been the time they needed. And in the end, he'd been enough.